Welcome back to Secrets Exposed. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. You're the reason these stories worth sharing. Tell us where you're watching from, city or country. We're amazed by how far these tales reach. To get daily new and amazing stories for you, subscribe our channel and press bell icon. Alright, let's begin. Rain drizzled down in fine needles, coating the windshield of Michael's car as he turned onto the quieter back streets of the city. His wipers swished rhythmically, but his mind wasn't on the road. He had been away for months on contract work, and tonight was his first real night back in the city. He thought he'd spend it quietly, maybe take a long shower, maybe call his son tomorrow. Just tomorrow. But fate didn't wait. The glow of a flickering street lamp revealed an alley up ahead, dark and narrow. Michael would have driven past without a second glance, until he saw movement. A small figure, hunched against the wall, holding something in trembling hands. Michael's instinct told him to look closer. He slowed the car, squinting through the wet glass. That's when he saw it. A boy, no more than 10, crouched on the cold concrete, clutching a battered piece of cardboard. The words scrawled in black marker cut through the haze of rain. "Will work for food." Michael's breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer, as if his eyes couldn't be trusted. The boy's hood slipped slightly, revealing pale skin, messy brown hair damp with rain, and a face that felt painfully familiar. It was Ethan, his son. For a moment Michael froze, unable to breathe, unable to believe. 1,000 images flashed in his mind. Ethan laughing on his 5th birthday, Ethan waving goodbye during the divorce hearing, Ethan's small hand slipping out his own as Laura dragged him away. He hadn't seen him in nearly a year, and now here he was, begging, like a stray animal nobody wanted. Michael slammed the brakes, his tires splashing water across the curb. He leapt out of the car, his shoes soaking instantly. "Ethan," he shouted, voice cracking. The boy flinched violently, like a creature cornered. His eyes widened with fear instead of recognition. He pressed back against the wall, clutching the cardboard to his chest as if it could shield him. His lips moved, whispering something Michael couldn't hear over the rain. Michael crouched down, hands raised in surrender. "It's me, it's Dad. Ethan, look at me." The boy's eyes, ringed with dark circles, darted up hesitantly. His face was thin, far thinner than Michael remembered. A bruise, ugly purple, spread across his cheekbone. His lips were cracked, trembling. Slowly, almost inaudibly, he whispered, "Mom's man threw me out." The words stabbed Michael like knives. He couldn't move for a second, couldn't even think. The rain pattered harder, the neon glow from a liquor store sign casting a pale shimmer across the alley. Michael finally closed the gap and pulled Ethan into his arms. The boy resisted for a heartbeat, stiff with fear, then collapsed against him, shivering violently. His body felt weightless, frighteningly frail, as though weeks of hunger had hollowed him out. Michael pressed his hand against the back of Ethan's head, shielding him from the rain. "You're safe now. I've got you." His own voice shook, and he didn't care. He carried Ethan to the car, setting him gently into the passenger seat. The heater roared to life, fogging the windows, wrapping Ethan in a fragile warmth. Michael glanced at his son, his chest tight. Ethan's hands were red and cracked, fingers stiff from cold. He rubbed them together, but barely generated any heat. Why are you out here, Ethan?" Michael asked softly, gripping the wheel though the car hadn't moved yet. The boy lowered his head, pulling the hood over his face. For a long while, the only sound was the hiss of the heater and the rain drumming on the roof. Then, in a voice so small it barely reached Michael's ears, Ethan said, "I'm not his kid." He said, "I don't belong there." Michael's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. He didn't need to ask who he was. He already knew. As the car rolled back onto the empty street, Michael stole glances at Ethan, each one a stab to the heart. This was his son, his boy, reduced to a beggar in the rain. And somewhere, warm and dry, Laura and her new husband were sipping wine, pretending they were a family. Michael swallowed hard, eyes burning. They thought he was worthless, but tonight had changed everything. The heater hummed inside the car, pushing back the chill that clung to Ethan's skin. The boy sat curled into the passenger seat, his knees drawn to his chest, hoodie damp and clinging to his thin frame. Raindrops traced patterns down the fogged windows, blurring the neon lights outside into streaks of red and blue. Michael drove slowly, his hands tight on the wheel, but his eyes kept flicking to his son. Every glance was a reminder of how much time he had lost and how much Ethan had suffered in his absence. "Ethan," he said softly, trying not to scare him, "how long have you been out here?" The boy's lips pressed together, trembling slightly. He rubbed his cracked hands together as though trying to erase the question. His silence felt heavier than any answer. Michael swallowed, voice lower. "Son, please, just tell me." Finally, Ethan whispered, "Since yesterday." Michael's grip on the steering wheel tightened until the leather creaked. Yesterday, his son had been sitting in the rain, in the cold, begging strangers for scraps. He wanted to pull the car over, hold Ethan tighter, tell him he'd never let anyone hurt him again. But he knew if he pushed too much now, Ethan would shut down. He glanced at him again. The boy's cheekbone was bruised, his lips split at the corner. There were faint lines along his wrists, marks Michael recognized immediately. Not the kind of child made falling while playing. The kind left by a belt. "Who did this to you?" Michael asked, his voice shaking despite his effort to keep calm. Ethan's eyes darted toward the window. He didn't answer at first, just breathed out, fogging the glass. Then, quietly, "Greg." Michael felt fire crawl up his throat. Greg, the man Laura had chosen over him. The man who paraded himself as a stepfather while treating his son like trash. Michael had suspected for months, but suspicion was nothing compared to hearing it from Ethan's own mouth. Ethan added quickly, his voice catching, "But Mom, she lets him. She tells me to listen. She says I'm the problem. That if I behaved, he wouldn't." His words trailed off, breaking into silence. Michael's chest felt hollow. Laura, the woman he once loved, the mother of his child. She had stood in courtrooms, smugly telling judges that Michael was unfit, unworthy. And yet she allowed this? Michael pulled the car over near a closed diner, its neon sign buzzing faintly. He turned to Ethan, lowering his voice. "Listen to me. None of this is your fault. Do you hear me? Not one bit. You didn't do anything to deserve this." For the first time, Ethan looked directly at him. His eyes were wide, wet, searching, as if testing whether he could believe his father's words. Then he whispered, "Why didn't you come back sooner?" The question stabbed deep. Michael exhaled shakily, running a hand down his face. "I wanted Ethan. I tried. But your mom," the court, he stopped, realizing excuses wouldn't heal the wound. "I should have fought harder. I'm here now, and I'm not leaving you again. That's a promise." Ethan blinked, a single tear slipping down his cheek. He nodded once, as if clinging to that promise with all the strength he had left. Michael restarted the engine, determination hardening inside him. He couldn't just march to Laura's house tonight. If he exploded now, she would twist it against him again, paint him as unstable. He needed proof, evidence that couldn't be denied. As they drove, Ethan leaned against the window, exhaustion pulling at him. His breath slowed, eyes fluttering closed. In the rearview mirror, Michael caught a glimpse of his son's reflection, fragile, bruised, but still holding on. Michael whispered to himself, almost a vow, "They think I'm worthless. They'll see how wrong they are." The rain eased into a drizzle as the car disappeared into the night, father and son heading toward a battle neither of them could avoid. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time Michael pulled into the cracked driveway of his small rental apartment. The building loomed dark and quiet, the kind of place nobody looked twice at. It wasn't much, but tonight it would be the safest place Ethan had known in a long time. Michael carried him inside, the boy's head resting against his shoulder, too tired to walk on his own. Ethan's clothes clung damply to his thin body, so Michael gently set him on the couch and hurried to grab a blanket. When he draped it over him, Ethan stirred, whispering something under his breath. "What is it, buddy?" Michael asked softly. Ethan's eyes fluttered open just enough to reveal a sliver of fear. Don't take me back." Michael's chest tightened. "I won't. Not now, not ever. You're staying with me." His voice was firm, but inside, guilt gnawed at him. He had let too much time pass. He had believed the courts, believed Laura's words, when deep down he should have fought harder. Ethan fell asleep quickly, curled under the blanket, his breathing uneven. Michael sat nearby, watching him with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Each bruise on Ethan's skin told a story Michael hadn't been there to stop. But that would change. As the night dragged on, Michael's mind sharpened into strategy. Bursting into Laura's house, screaming wouldn't work. She was cunning, always had been. In court, she'd worn tears like jewelry, convincing everyone she was the victim, that Michael was unstable. No, he needed evidence. Something undeniable. The next morning, sunlight broke through grim clouds. Michael woke to find Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from a cup of cocoa Michael had made. The boy looked smaller in the daylight, shoulders hunched, hoodie sleeves covering his hands. "Did you sleep okay?" Michael asked. Ethan nodded slightly, though his eyes stayed on the cocoa. After a moment, he whispered, "They'll be angry if they find me here." Michael crouched beside him. "You don't need to be afraid anymore. You're with me now." But Ethan's silence said what his lips didn't. He didn't believe safety could last. Later that day, Michael drove Ethan to a clinic. The nurse frowned at the bruises, jotting notes, asking questions that made Ethan shrink in his seat. Michael answered carefully, but every question was a reminder of the fight ahead. The nurse mentioned that with a proper report, child services could get involved, but Michael knew how slowly systems moved, how often children slipped through cracks. He couldn't trust them alone. That evening, Michael sat on the couch with Ethan, a cartoon flickering on the old TV. Ethan barely watched, his eyes heavy, but every so often he'd glance at Michael, as if checking he was still there. Michael rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "Tomorrow, I'm going to talk to your mom. And Greg." Ethan's head snapped up, panic flaring. "No, don't make them mad again." Michael shook his head. "I won't shout. I just need answers." Ethan bit his lip, then slowly nodded, though fear lingered in his eyes. That night, Michael lay awake long after Ethan drifted off. The rain had stopped, but his storm was only beginning. Tomorrow, he would walk back into the house he once called home. He didn't know what Laura would say, or what Greg might do. But one thing was certain. They would see he wasn't worthless. Not anymore. The following afternoon, the sky hung heavy with gray clouds, thick and restless, as if the weather itself knew a storm was coming. Michael parked a block away from Laura's house. His stomach twisted with dread, but his resolve was carved in stone. Ethan sat silently in the passenger seat, clutching the strap of his backpack. "You don't have to come in," Michael told him gently. But Ethan shook his head. "If you go alone, they'll lie." His voice was barely above a whisper, but there was steel in it, steel that had been forged through pain no child should carry. Michael reached over, squeezed his son's hand. "Stay close to me, all right?" Together, they walked the familiar path to the house Michael once called home. The paint had been redone, brighter now, the flower beds trimmed. It was as though Laura had tried to erase every trace of the life they'd shared, replacing it with her own version of perfection. When Michael knocked, the door swung open to reveal Laura. She looked almost the same, perfectly done hair, sharp eyes that softened only when she chose. Today, it didn't soften. Instead, they narrowed the instant she saw Michael. "Of course," she said coldly, lips curving into a smirk. "You couldn't stay gone." Her gaze dropped to Ethan, lingering with a flicker of annoyance. "And you brought him?" Behind her, Greg appeared, leaning casually against the doorframe, arms crossed. His smirk was wider, the kind that dared Michael to make the first move. Michael took a breath, forcing his voice steady. "We need to talk." Laura stepped aside just enough to let them in, though her eyes never left Michael's face. Inside, the house smelled faintly of wine and lavender polish. The furniture gleamed, but to Michael it felt like walking into a stranger's home. Ethan shrank against his father as Laura settled on the couch, crossing her legs elegantly, while Greg hovered by the doorway like a guard dog. Michael stayed standing. His voice was calm, deliberate. Why was Ethan out on the streets last night? Begging for food. Laura's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "Oh, for God's sake. He's dramatic. He probably ran out there for attention. Ethan's eyes filled with panic. He opened his mouth, but Laura's glare silenced him instantly. Michael's jaw clenched. He had bruises. He told me Greg hit him. Greg's smirk widened. Kid needs discipline. You always coddled him. No wonder he's soft. Michael's fists curled, but he forced them to his sides. Losing his temper would only hand them ammunition. You locked him out in the cold, Michael pressed. You starved him. Laura rolled her eyes, leaning back into the cushions. This is exactly why the judge sided with me. You make mountains out of nothing. Ethan's fine. If he has a bruise, it's probably from tripping. He's clumsy. Michael turned to Ethan. Tell her what you told me. But Ethan stood frozen, hands twisting the hem of his hoodie. His lips trembled, but no sound came out. Laura's smile widened, triumphant. See? Nothing. He knows I'm right. Michael's chest burned, fury threatening to break through his restraint. He could feel Greg's smug gaze pressing into him, daring him to lash out. He drew a slow breath, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You're right. Maybe I overreacted. Laura blinked, thrown off for a second. Greg frowned, smirk faltering. Michael turned to Ethan, his voice soft. Come on, son. Let's go. Ethan hesitated, eyes darting between his parents. Laura's glare bore into him like a blade, but Michael's calm presence was stronger. He stepped closer to his father, finally moving toward the door. Laura's voice followed them, dripping with venom. You'll never win, Michael. The court already decided. You're nothing. Michael didn't turn back, but inside, her words etched deeper than she knew. Not as defeat, but as fuel. He walked Ethan to the car, his mind racing. If they thought he was nothing, then it was time to show them exactly how wrong they were. The drive back from Laura's house was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against Michael's chest like a weight. Ethan sat curled in the passenger seat, staring at his shoes. His shoulders were tense, as if expecting someone to shout at him any second. Michael wanted to speak, wanted to promise his son it was all going to be okay, but he knew words would sound empty right now. He had walked into that house hoping for a crack in their facade, and instead found Laura smug and Greg grinning like a wolf. They had control. They knew it, but not for long. Back at the apartment, Ethan sat at the table, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate without eating. Michael sat across from him, watching carefully. Ethan, he said gently, what happened back there wasn't your fault. You don't have to be afraid of telling the truth. Ethan's fork froze. His eyes darted up, then quickly down again. She'll be mad. Who? Michael pressed. Silence. Then, in a voice barely audible, Mom. Michael's breath caught. It wasn't just Greg. It had never been just Greg. The puzzle was still incomplete, but a corner piece had clicked into place. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Listen, buddy. They can't hurt you if people know the truth. But I need proof. Do you understand? Ethan hesitated, then nodded slightly. His small hand trembled as he set the fork down. That night, while Ethan slept on the couch wrapped in blankets, Michael sat by the window, lit only by the orange glow of a street lamp. He stared at his phone, scrolling through cheap security cameras online, his mind racing. If he stormed into their house again, Laura would twist it. If he went to court empty-handed, the judge would dismiss him. He needed something undeniable, and that meant watching, listening, recording. The next evening, Michael parked down the block from Laura's house. He left Ethan with a trusted neighbor, telling him only, I'll be back soon. His stomach churned as he crouched in the shadows near the familiar home, a small camera clipped to his jacket, his phone recording quietly in his pocket. Through the glowing windows, life went on inside as though nothing was wrong. Laura, glass of wine in hand, scrolled her phone on the couch. Greg leaned against the counter, talking loudly about a football game. Ethan's absence wasn't even noticed. Michael's jaw clenched. His son had been on the streets, and here they were, laughing like kings in their castle. Hours passed in silence. The air grew colder, dew forming on the grass, but Michael didn't move. He had to see it for himself. He had to catch it. Then at last something changed. Laura stood, her face tightening as she glanced at the empty hallway. She called Ethan's name sharply, twice. Of course, no answer. Her glass slammed down on the table. Greg muttered, "Kids with his old man. Let him rot there." Laura's voice, sharp and venomous, sliced through the night. "Don't you dare say that. He'll come crawling back. He always does. And when he does, he'll learn his place." Michael's pulse pounded in his ears. He had her voice on record now. Not violence, not yet, but cruelty laid bare. It was a start. He crouched lower, whispering to himself, "Keep talking, Laura. Show them who you really are." When he finally slipped back to the car hours later, the night was still and heavy, but Michael felt a grim fire inside him. He wasn't powerless anymore. Every word he'd captured was a weapon. As he drove home, the city lights reflected in the windshield, and his mind sharpened into resolve. They had mocked him in court, called him worthless. They thought they had buried him. But the game had changed. Michael was done playing by their rules. The following nights blurred together, but Michael's determination sharpened with every hour. He became a shadow on the street where he once lived, parking his car far enough to avoid suspicion, slipping through backyards to crouch beneath windows. Every sound mattered. Every glimpse was a chance to peel back Laura's perfect mask. Ethan stayed at the apartment most evenings, restless, afraid. He asked questions in whispers. "Will they come looking for me? Will they hurt you too?" Michael always answered with calm reassurance, though inside, the fear burned just as bright. But Michael's fear was fuel, and he was ready to use it. One Thursday evening, Michael pressed his phone against the cracked frame of the kitchen window, the faint glow of the screen recording every second. Inside, the air between Laura and Greg was thick, the kind that clung before a storm. Ethan was there this time. He sat stiff at the table, hands in his lap, head bowed. His plate was empty. Laura's voice cut sharply. "Eat." "I'm not hungry," Ethan whispered. Greg chuckled from across the counter. "Kid's lying. He's always hungry." Laura slammed her hand on the table, making Ethan flinch. "Don't you dare lie to me. Do you know how much I do for you? How much I sacrifice?" Her words were laced with venom, her wine glass half full in her other hand. Ethan's voice cracked. "I said I'm not hungry." The crack of the slap echoed through the kitchen. Michael's body tensed outside, his hands shaking as he held the phone steady. He wanted to tear through the door, but he forced himself to stay still. He needed proof. He needed them to damn themselves. Laura leaned closer to Ethan, her face inches from his. "You're just like him," she hissed. "Weak, worthless, always making me look like the bad one." Greg snorted. "Told you. Kid needs breaking in." Ethan's eyes shimmered with tears, but he didn't cry out. He just sat there, small and silent, his body trembling under the weight of her words. Michael's throat burned as he whispered to himself, "That's it. Keep showing the world who you are." When Laura stormed out of the kitchen, leaving her glass half empty on the counter, Greg's smirk faded slightly. He crouched in front of Ethan, voice lower but no less cruel. "You better learn fast, boy. In this house, you do as you're told, or you'll wish you had." Ethan nodded quickly, fear tightening his features. Michael pulled back into the shadows, his heart pounding. He had it now, Laura's slap, her words, Greg's threats. It was no longer just bruises whispered in private. It was living proof, captured on camera. That night, back at the apartment, Ethan sat curled on the couch while Michael transferred the footage onto his laptop. His son watched silently, eyes fixed on the flickering screen as his mother's hand struck across his face again and again in slow replay. "Why are you keeping it?" Ethan asked quietly. Michael turned to him, voice steady. "Because it's the truth, and the truth is how we'll end this." Ethan swallowed, pulling the blanket tighter around himself. "They'll hate me more." Michael's chest tightened, but he leaned forward, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "No, Ethan, they're already showing who they are. The only thing that changes now is that the world will finally see it too." For the first time, Ethan's eyes lifted and lingered on his father's. There was fear, yes, but something else flickered there too. Something fragile, like hope trying to spark in the dark. Michael saw it, and he knew he couldn't stop now. They had built their lies for too long. Soon, those lies would collapse. Michael barely slept that weekend. The footage burned in his mind. Laura's slap, her venomous words, Greg's looming threats. He had proof now, but proof alone wasn't enough. He needed to time everything perfectly. If he rushed, Laura would twist it again, spin her lies in court like she always had. But the walls of secrecy around their house were starting to crack. And Laura knew it. On Saturday afternoon, Michael noticed the first sign. As he parked a few houses down, pretending to check his phone, Laura's curtains shifted. A narrow gap opened, just enough for her eyes to sweep the street. A flicker of suspicion crossed her face before the curtain fell back into place. She was watching. That night, Michael left his car further away and walked. The air was crisp, the silence broken only by the occasional bark of a dog. He crouched low near the backyard fence, listening. Inside, voices rose. Laura's, sharp and tense. Greg's, heavier, annoyed. "He's back," Laura snapped. "I saw him." Greg scoffed. "So what? He can't touch us." The court already buried him. "You don't get it," Laura hissed. "He's sniffing around. He'll try something. He always does." Michael's pulse raced. He pressed record on his phone again. Every word mattered now. Then Ethan's voice floated in, timid. "Can I go to Dad's tomorrow?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Laura's voice, cold as ice. "Absolutely not. You live here. He doesn't get to play hero." Greg added, "Stop dreaming, kid. He'll never win." Michael's chest tightened. The boy's small voice crushed again. He wanted to kick the door down, but instead he stepped back into the shadows, forcing patience. The next morning, Ethan stirred restlessly on Michael's couch. He hadn't slept well, eyes shadowed, shoulders hunched. "They know you're watching," he whispered. Michael knelt beside him. "That doesn't change anything. What matters is that we have the truth now. We'll show it when the time is right." Ethan's eyes flicked up, glassy with fear. "If you lose again, they'll hurt me worse." The words tore through Michael. He gripped Ethan's hand, firm but gentle. "I won't lose. Not this time." Later that day, as Michael went through the footage on his laptop, Ethan lingered nearby, silent. On the screen, Laura's slap played again, over and over, paired with her voice. "You're just like him. Weak. Worthless." Ethan's hands trembled. What if she's right? Michael turned sharply, his voice steady but fierce. "She's wrong. She wants you to believe that because if you believe it, she wins. But you're not worthless. You're stronger than both of them combined." Ethan blinked rapidly, holding back tears. For a moment, he nodded, as if wanting to believe. That night, as Michael stepped outside to clear his head, he noticed something chilling. A car idled at the end of the street. Headlights off, windows tinted. Watching, Michael's stomach knotted. He knew immediately whose eyes were behind that glass. Laura wasn't just suspicious anymore. She was preparing for war. The car that idled on the street the night before didn't return, but its shadow lingered in Michael's thoughts all morning. He brewed coffee in silence, staring through the blinds as Ethan sat at the table, quietly sketching on a scrap of paper. Every sound outside made Michael tense. By noon, the knock came. Hard, sharp, not the uncertain knock of a visitor, but the demand of someone who thought they owned the doorway. Michael opened the door to find Greg standing there. His stance was relaxed, but his eyes carried something darker. Behind him, Laura leaned against the hood of her SUV, arms crossed, lips curled into a knowing smirk. Greg didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped into the apartment, scanning the room like he owned it. "Nice place," he muttered. His tone dripped with mockery. Ethan froze at the table, pencil clattering from his hand. He shrank in his seat, eyes wide. Michael moved quickly, stepping between Greg and the boy. "What do you want?" Greg's smirk widened. "To talk. Man to man." Laura's voice floated in from the doorway, calm but venomous. "You've been sniffing around. Parking near my house. Spying, recording. Don't think I don't see you." Michael's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." Greg chuckled, low and threatening. He leaned closer, his breath sour with cigarettes. "Here's the deal. You back off. Stop filling the kid's head with lies. Stop playing detective. Otherwise, accidents happen." His eyes flicked meaningfully toward Ethan. Michael's blood boiled. He wanted to knock the smirk clean off Greg's face, but Ethan's terrified gaze held him back. He couldn't lose control. Not here, not now. Instead, he straightened, his voice calm but razor sharp. "You've already said too much." Greg frowned, confusion flashing for a moment. Michael tapped his pocket. "You think I'd meet you without proof rolling?" Laura's smirk faltered, though only slightly. Greg's fist clenched, his voice a growl. "You think that'll save you?" Michael stepped closer, lowering his tone. "No, but it'll bury you. Both of you." The room went still. For the first time, Greg hesitated. Laura, however, recovered quickly. She let out a short, cold laugh. "You're bluffing. You always bluff. That's why the court laughed you out last time." "You're nothing, Michael. Nothing." Ethan flinched at her words, but Michael held his ground. "We'll see." Laura narrowed her eyes, studying him as if weighing how much he really had. Then she gestured to Greg. "We're done here." Greg lingered a moment longer, leaning close enough for only Michael to hear. "You better sleep with one eye open." Then he walked out, Laura trailing behind with her smug smile carefully back in place. The door shut, silence slamming into the room. Michael exhaled, muscles trembling with restraint. Ethan spoke first, voice barely audible. "They're not going to stop." Michael turned, kneeling in front of him. He placed both hands on his son's shoulders, steady and firm. "Neither am I." That night, Michael sat in the dim glow of his laptop, reviewing the footage again. Laura's slap, her venomous words, Greg's threats. Piece by piece, the truth was building into a wall too strong for them to break. But as he watched, he couldn't shake the echo of Greg's warning. Accidents happen. Michael knew the storm wasn't over. It was only beginning. The following days carried a suffocating weight. Michael double-checked every lock, every window, every shadow outside his apartment. He kept Ethan close, never letting him walk alone, not even to the corner store. Still, the tension only grew. Ethan's fear was constant. At night, he jolted awake at the smallest sound, clutching the blanket like armor. Sometimes he whispered in the dark, half asleep, "Don't let them take me back." Michael would sit beside him, smoothing his hair, whispering, "I won't. I promise." But inside, he worried his promises weren't enough. By midweek, the storm finally broke. Michael had stepped out briefly to grab groceries, leaving Ethan with the neighbor who lived one floor down. The man was kind, a quiet retired teacher, and Michael trusted him. He wasn't gone longer than half an hour. But when he returned, the front door to his apartment building was ajar. His stomach dropped. He sprinted up the stairs, groceries spilling from his arms. The apartment door was wide open. Inside, chaos. The table overturned, Ethan's sketchbook torn across the floor. "Ethan!" Michael's voice cracked as he bolted inside. From the corner of the room came a muffled sob. Ethan crouched beneath the window, arms wrapped over his head. His face was pale, streaked with tears. The neighbor hovered beside him, shaken, holding an old baseball bat. "They were here," the neighbor said breathlessly. "The man and the woman. They tried to drag him out. I stopped them, but..." Michael dropped to his knees, pulling Ethan into his arms. The boy clung to him, trembling so hard his small hands dug into Michael's shirt. "They said," Ethan gasped between sobs, "they said if you don't stop, next time, they won't leave me." Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. Laura and Greg had crossed the line. They weren't just threatening anymore. They were trying to take his son by force. That night, Michael sat in the dim glow of his laptop, the footage playing silently on loop. Laura's slap, Greg's threats, their poisonous words. Now he had more than video. He had witnesses, a neighbor who saw them invade his home. But it still wasn't enough. He needed them exposed completely, inescapably. As Ethan slept curled against his side, Michael thought back to Laura's smug smirk, her venomous whisper, "You're nothing." He remembered Greg's warning, "Accidents happen." The fury that rose inside him was cold, not wild. Cold enough to think clearly. Cold enough to plan. When Ethan stirred in his sleep, Michael stroked his hair, whispering a vow to the dark. "No more running. No more hiding. They think they're untouchable, but this time, I'll end it." And though the apartment was quiet, Michael knew the silence was fragile. Laura and Greg weren't finished. They were desperate now, and desperate people were dangerous. The game was no longer about custody. It was survival. The night after Laura and Greg stormed his apartment, Michael sat awake long after Ethan had fallen asleep. The apartment was dark except for the glow of his laptop. Footage of Laura's slap, Greg's threats, and Ethan's bruised face played in loops, each second like fuel to a fire he could no longer contain. They had crossed the line. They weren't just cruel parents anymore. They were predators. And predators only stopped when the world finally saw their teeth. Michael pulled out his phone and made a call he had been dreading. His old friend, Daniel, a local reporter. Their friendship had frayed over the years, mostly because Michael hated being pitted. But tonight wasn't about pride. Tonight was about war. Mike, Daniel's groggy voice answered. I have a story, Michael said flatly, and I have proof. But I need you to help me burn it into the light. There was silence on the line before Daniel answered. Alert now. Bring it tomorrow. The next day, Michael drove Ethan to the diner down the block, the one with cracked leather booths and a flickering neon sign. Daniel was already there, notebook out, coffee steaming. Ethan sat silently beside his father, eyes darting nervously around the room. Michael placed his laptop on the table, opening the files. He didn't speak as the slap replayed, Laura's venom cutting the air. You're just like him. Weak. Worthless. Daniel's jaw tightened. He scribbled something down. Jesus, Mike. This is bad. With this, child services will have no choice but to act. Michael shook his head. Not enough. You don't know Laura. She'll twist it, claim it's staged, claim Ethan's lying. I need something bigger. Something live. Daniel frowned. Live. Michael leaned in, his voice low. I'm going to make them show themselves. No edits. No denials. They'll bury themselves in front of the whole world. Ethan's small hand gripped his sleeve, trembling. Dad, what if it goes wrong? Michael turned, cupping his son's face. Then we fight harder. But it won't go wrong. Not this time. That evening, Michael returned to Laura Street, parking further than usual. He carried a small bag, wireless microphones, a body cam, and a backup recorder. Daniel's contacts at the local station had agreed to prep a live feed. All Michael had to do was trigger it. The plan was simple. Confront Laura and Greg one final time, draw out their cruelty, and let the world see them for who they really were. As he crouched beneath the shadows of the familiar house, Michael's pulse thundered. He could hear muffled laughter inside. Laura and Greg, drinking, smug as ever. Then, the sharp sound of a glass shattering. Laura's voice rose, shrill, furious. You think you're better than me? You think anyone cares what he says? Greg's booming laugh followed. The court already buried him. He's finished. Michael's chest tightened. Every word was perfect. Every word was a nail in their coffin. He pressed the button on his recorder, the tiny red light glowing. This time, they wouldn't just be whispers on tape. They would be voices echoing into the open, undeniable and damning. But as he edged closer to the window, he caught something else, something that froze him. Laura's voice, colder than before. If he keeps pushing, we'll get rid of him for good. Him and the boy. Accidents happen all the time. Michael's blood turned to ice. This wasn't just about cruelty. This was a threat of murder. He stepped back, breath heavy, heart hammering. The game had shifted again. It wasn't just about custody or bruises. It was about survival. He whispered to himself, tomorrow, it ends. Sunday evening. The air was still, heavy, like the city itself was holding its breath. Michael adjusted the small body cam under his shirt, its blinking green light hidden beneath the folds of fabric. His phone buzzed once, a text from Daniel. Feed is ready. Whenever you're set. Michael glanced at Ethan, who sat in the passenger seat, clutching his backpack. His son's face was pale, eyes wide, but there was no hesitation. You don't have to be here, Michael whispered. Ethan shook his head. If I'm not, they'll say it's lies again. Michael reached over, squeezing his hand. Stay behind me. No matter what. The house looked the same as it always had. Flower beds neat, porch light glowing. From the outside, it was perfect. Inside, it was rot. Tonight, the world would finally see. Michael walked up the steps and knocked. His pulse thundered, every beat like a drum. Laura opened the door, her expression twisting instantly into disdain. You again. Greg appeared behind her, beer in hand, smirk firmly in place. Didn't get enough last time? Michael stepped inside without waiting for permission, Ethan close at his side. We need to talk. All of us. Laura scoffed. Oh, please. What's this now? Another pathetic attempt to play daddy of the year. Michael's voice was calm, even. You've hurt Ethan. You've locked him out. You've starved him. You've hit him. Greg laughed. Discipline. But Laura's eyes narrowed, sharp and calculating. She sensed something different in Michael tonight. What's your angle? She asked. Michael gestured to Ethan. Go ahead. Tell them. Ethan's voice shook, but he forced the words out. You threw me out. You made me sleep outside. You hit me. His chin trembled, but his gaze didn't waver. Laura barked a laugh, cold and dismissive. See? Drama. He's learned from you. Weakness runs in the blood. Greg leaned forward, sneering. What are you going to do, huh? Call the cops? Court already buried you once. You're nothing. Michael took a slow breath. Then he spoke, steady and clear. No, I don't need to call anyone, because they're already listening. He tapped his shirt. The body cam's tiny green light blinked in the dim glow of the living room. For a moment, silence. Then Laura's face drained of color. Greg's smirk faltered. What did you say? Laura hissed. Michael repeated, louder this time, each word like a hammer. Everything you said, every threat, every slap, every word you just spat. The world is watching. Greg lunged forward, but Michael stepped back, standing tall. Ethan clutched his father's arm, eyes wide but filled with something new. Hope. From his phone came the faintest buzz, Daniel's confirmation. Live. Streaming. Laura's mask cracked. Her perfect posture broke into frantic panic. You know. You can't. She turned toward Greg. Do something. Greg's fists clenched, but his swagger was gone. He muttered, this is a setup. Michael's voice cut through the chaos. No, this is the truth. And for once, you don't get to hide it. Ethan's tears fell freely now, but his grip on his father tightened. He wasn't trembling anymore. Laura shrieked, her voice rising into hysteria. You think this changes anything? You're still worthless. You'll always be worthless. But outside, headlights appeared. First one car, then another. Police. Reporters. Daniel's contacts had made sure the stream was amplified. For the first time, it wasn't Michael against Laura's lies. It was Michael and Ethan against the world finally seeing. Greg dropped his beer, the bottle shattering across the floor. Laura backed into the couch, pale, her words caught in her throat. Michael turned to his son, voice soft but fierce. It's over. And this time, he knew it was true. The sirens pierced the night, cutting through the chaos inside Laura's perfect little home. Blue and red lights spilled across the curtains, washing the living room in a surreal glow. For the first time, Laura's kingdom of control was crumbling, not in whispers or suspicions, but under the gaze of the entire world. Michael stood tall, Ethan clinging to his side, while Laura trembled against the couch. Her once perfect poise had shattered. Her hands shook, her eyes darted as though searching for a way out. Greg stood stiff, fists clenched, but the swagger was gone from his face. The door burst open. Officers stormed in, voices sharp and commanding. One of them gestured toward Michael. We've been receiving a live feed. Is this the source? Michael nodded, pulling the small body cam from his shirt. Every word is recorded. Their threats, their abuse. It's all here. The officer's eyes hardened as he glanced at Ethan, who clutched his father's coat, face streaked with tears. That image alone said more than any recording. Laura tried to speak, her voice high, desperate. He's lying. He staged this. It's all fake. But Daniel entered behind the officers, phone still streaming. It's not fake, Laura. Half the city heard it live. Her face drained of color. Greg tried to push past, growling. You can't just take us in without, but the officer's hand pressed firmly against his chest, shoving him back. Another pair of officers cuffed him, ignoring his protests. Laura lunged toward Ethan, words spilling like venom. You ungrateful little brat. You ruined everything. Michael stepped in front of his son, shielding him. Not anymore. The officers pulled Laura back, her shrill protests echoing uselessly into the night. For the first time, her power meant nothing. She wasn't a mother in control. She was just another criminal being led away. When the door finally closed behind them, silence settled. Ethan buried his face against his father's chest, his body trembling with sobs he had been holding for too long. Michael wrapped his arms around him tightly, whispering, "It's over, Ethan. You're safe now. You're safe." Outside, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Michael ignored them. He carried Ethan through the crowd, shielding him from the chaos, each step heavier with relief. The following days blurred with legal procedures. The recordings spread quickly. Laura's slap, her venomous words, Greg's threats. There was no spinning at this time. Child Services intervened. The court moved swiftly, and custody was granted fully to Michael. Laura and Greg faced charges: assault, child endangerment, unlawful threats. For years, they had laughed at the system, twisting it to their favor. Now the same system turned on them, armed with undeniable proof. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the quiet moments that followed. Weeks later, Michael sat on the couch in his small apartment. The TV hummed softly with an old cartoon, the same one Ethan once ignored. But now, his son sat beside him, laughing at the silly voices, a bowl of popcorn balanced between them. For the first time in years, Ethan's laughter sounded real. Michael watched him, his chest aching with both pride and sorrow. They had lost so much time, but now they had another chance. As the night grew late, Ethan curled up against him, whispering, "You didn't let me go." Michael kissed the top of his head. "I never will." Through the window, the city lights shimmered, no longer menacing, but hopeful. The storm had passed, and for once, Michael didn't feel worthless. He felt like what he always was meant to be: a father.